Well, good day, everyone. My name is Ryan Johnson, and I work for Catholic Faith Technologies. Thank you so much for attending this talk in a virtual setting. I'm so thrilled to get to be here with you in the Archdiocese of Newark to talk about young families in the church, which is an exciting thing. Before we start talking about accompanying young families and what that looks like and how we can live that out, what young couples need and how the parish can really help to fill that, I just want to do a little bit of an introduction and tell you a little bit more about myself. So, as I stated, my name is Ryan Johnson. I work for Catholic Faith Technologies. I've worked there for 3 years. Prior to that, I worked for a technology company that implemented Salesforce for nonprofits. So I've worked a lot in technology, also very passionate about the church. I graduated from Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas in 2012. Go Ravens, if there's any Ravens out there. And met my wife, Megan, who I've been married to now for 7 years as of October 12th. Met her working at a summer camp in the Archdiocese of Kansas City in Kansas, which is where we currently live. We live in Overland Park, Kansas, and we met at Camp Tecawitha, which is a youth camp that's run by the Archdiocese for the children of the Archdiocese. And it starts at 5th grade, goes all the way up through 12th grade, so I've spent a lot of time in youth ministry and working with kids, so that was quite a blessing. We have a 2-year-old daughter, Lena Frances Johnson, and she was very much prayed for and hoped for, and so we're so thankful that God blessed us with children. So I have 2 brothers, one Alex, who lives in Brooklyn, New York, and my brother Luke lives in Cincinnati. So that's just a little bit about me and the perspective that I will bring to today's discussion. Now, I think it's important to kind of preface everything that I'm going to say today that, I do not work in parish ministry. I do not, work for the church. And so the perspective that I'm bringing to the table is really one of young families. What do young families need? And how I think, the church, the parish, practically can support young families and accompany them along this journey of being the domestic church and growing in holiness with their children. So we're going to begin today sort of talking about those things, and I want to start with really a quote that I love from Pope Francis, and it's from Amoris Laetitia, and it says, "The joy of love experienced by families is also the joy of the church." The joy of love experienced by families is also the joy of the church. What a beautiful sentiment that in family life, of course, there's sorrow, there's frustration, there's anger, there's hurt. There's also a lot of joy. And that the joy that is experienced by families, the joy of love that comes from being a family unit, the church should take joy in that. And I think that's beautiful sentiment. So I want to frame today's conversation in that light, that as a church we should take joy in our family's joy. So we're going to begin by talking about the role of the family. So what role does the family play in the church? And we're going to kind of rehash stuff that probably has been talked about. Of course, it's been talked about before. And of course, the role of the family is to be the domestic church, right? That, one of the vows is, will you accept children lovingly from God and raise them according to the law of Christ and His church? Of course, being the domestic church and raising your kids and passing on the faith and helping them to get to heaven. But that's so much easier said than done. That is a huge challenge and undertaking. And for a lot of young families, myself included sometimes, it's like easier said than done. And certainly, the question in the back of your mind, how do I know I'm doing this right? How do I know that I'm doing what's required of me, that I'm doing the things that matter? And so I think that's just really, really important to think about. The Catechism talks about the family, and I love this. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church in 1657, it says, "Here one learns endurance and the joy of work, fraternal love, generous, even repeated forgiveness, and above all, divine worship in prayer and the offering of one's life." So that's beautiful that the family can play that role, that in a family, watching the mother and father love one another, watching them lay down their lives, watching them go to work and come home, and the dignity that comes from that, watching them in prayer and worship. All of those things are such beautiful sentiments. So, the family plays such an important role in passing those on to children. We also can look at a quote that I love from Familiaris Consortio, number 52, from Pope St. John Paul II. He says, particularly today, the Christian family has a special vocation to witness to the paschal covenant of Christ by constantly radiating the joy of love and the certainty of hope for which it must give account. The Christian family loudly proclaims both the present virtues of the kingdom and the hope of the blessed life to come. The family truly does, have the ability to be a light, to be hope in the world, and to image the Trinity, image the love of Christ for His church. And there's such beauty in that the role the family plays. I also think the family really plays the role of living out the baptismal calling. The Father has sent me, so I send you. The family is in the world and a light to the world, and offers that opportunity to teach their children the way of the gospel by being hospitable to the stranger, helping the poor, seeking justice for the outcast. One thing that my wife and I, being a student at Benedictine, of course I have had the opportunity to read the Rule of St. Benedict quite often. And one thing that we have hanging in our house that we want to teach all of our children, and something we try to live out, is from the Rule of St. Benedict, and it is on the reception of guests, and it says, "May all guests who arrive be received like Christ, for I'm going to say I came as a guest and you received me." And that, I think, is just so important, teaching our children the way of the gospel and how to be hospitable to the stranger, how to help the poor, how to serve those in need, how to live out, seeing the innate dignity and worth in every person that we encounter. And that's hard work, right? But I think that the family plays an important role in facilitating that with their children. So next, I want to talk a little bit about the reality that young couples face. Now, this is from my perspective, right? This is just me, one person. I have, I've tried to do my research and talking with my friends and family, and also just my own lived experience. Young couples in the world today, especially young Catholic couples, when I talk about young couples, we're talking about the context of a young Catholic couple. And I think the reality is that it's hard to be a young Catholic couple trying to live out your vocation in the world today. Young couples face a declining share of young adults who are their peers, who affiliate themselves with the Catholic Church in both name, but also, more importantly, in practice. Luckily for us, both attending Catholic colleges, my wife attended St. Louis University, and I attended Benedictine College, as I said. And we are blessed to have a very strong core group of friends who are Catholic and who are trying to live this and walk this journey. But there's a lot of people that aren't that lucky, that aren't, that might be young, might be Catholic, may have gotten married in the church, may have had their kids baptized in the church, but they don't have those same connections. And they may have friends from grade school or high school or whatever that are Catholic, but aren't really living it, but they want to. So how that's really tough. Young Catholic couples are also faced with, there's a lot of people who are Catholic. As of 2014, there was a Pew study that only 68% of people who identify as Catholic actually got married in the church. And about 6% of those additional people came back and eventually had their marriages convalidated and were blessed by the church. But we're talking about, even among Catholics, only about 75% are even getting married in the church. So, that just goes back to, that living their faith within the context of their marriage with other couples can be hard. I also think that, young couples have a desire to meet other young families that are walking this same road with them. But among the demands of parenthood and diaper blowouts and, work and, trying to keep their marriage strong, that's really hard, especially when you have young children like my wife and I do, where, Lena's 2. She requires a lot of care and attention still. There's things she can now do on her own a little bit, and she's a little more self-sufficient than she was, say, when She was a month old, of course, but it's still really, really hard. And but we always want to find other couples who are walking this road with us, and sometimes luckily we have a good core group, but of course we'd always like to expand that circle. I think young couples, especially like myself, want to feel like they belong to their parish community. We go to Mass every day, but sometimes it doesn't always feel like we belong or we know how to get involved, and some of that's on us, right? Some of that's on us seeking out those opportunities. But some of that too is, we want to meet other couples, we want to get involved in the parish community, and sometimes it's really hard to know where we sort of fit in all of it. And lastly, I think that young couples face a lot of discouragement or even persecutions around some of their decisions to really try to live out their faith in Catholic marriage. For example, my wife and I have chosen to use natural family planning, and we have received a lot of pushback and blowback and questions, and they're not all bad, but from our friends and even from our family on our decision to do that, and is that the right thing, and why would we do that, and this and that. And we've been very committed to doing it, but another couple who might be on the fence and they get that kind of blowback and they don't have the support that they need or the ability to really back up their thoughts or feelings on the matter, it can be really, really tough. And so this is the reality that young couples are facing. And so I think it's just important for the church to acknowledge the reality that young couples have. As we look at how we could support them, looking at some of the challenges that they face is really important. I want to share some scripture from Acts because I think this really encapsulates so much of accompaniment, but I think especially when it comes to young families, how we can as a church accompany young families along this journey to get themselves and their children, of course, to heaven. And this comes from Acts 2, where they're talking about the early church and they're talking about the communal life. And it's 42 through 47, and it says, "They devoted themselves to the teaching of the apostles and to the communal life and to the breaking of the bread and to prayers. Awe came upon everyone, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their property and possessions and divide them among all according to each one's need. Every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple area and to breaking bread in their homes. They ate their meals with exultation and sincerity of heart, praising God and enjoying favor with all the people. And every day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved." What a beautiful, beautiful example of accompaniment, right? They devoted themselves to the teaching. They devoted themselves to the communal life, to breaking bread together, to praying together, okay? And at the end, it talks about how more numbers were being added. And that's so much of the gospel, right? Is finding the truth and the joy of the gospel in our own hearts and sharing that with other people and with, drawing them in. And I think young couples need that. They need to be accompanied. They need to have examples of other couples. They need to have, people that are living and walking this life and this journey together with them to help them. And so I want to kind of conclude with a couple of things, and really this is just practical items. How can the church accompany young families in light of what we talked about, in light of the struggles they face, in light of their desires, in light of what they're called to be as the domestic church? How can the church, especially really the parish, accompany young families? And like I said, these are 4 practical things, okay? These are from my perspective things that I think would be helpful. Like I said, I do not work in the church. I know that there's challenges, budgetary things. There's so much that goes into this. So I don't want this to sound like I'm bashing the church or the parish or anything. It's not that. It's just, I think that there's opportunity here for the church to accompany young families. So I have 4 things. So the first is provide opportunities to break bread, just like we talked about in the apostles, to find friendship and mentorship with other couples. The question my wife and I ask each other all the time: how do we know we're doing this right? And I know that we never really know, right? I mean, no matter what it is, you don't really know. We don't see the fruit of our labor, right? The kingdom is sort of always beyond us, as there's a prayer that talks about. And so, we won't know, but having examples, having people to strive for holiness with, having other families to walk this road with would be really helpful. And so having a parish where, you can bring young families together to allow them to meet each other is wonderful. There's times my wife and I will go to mass, and a couple pews over or across the church, it's like you see a couple other young families that look about your age with about the same age kid, and you're like, oh man, they'd be really fun to probably be friends with, But, mass gets over, people leave, and there's no opportunity really to sort of congregate and bring those people together. And I know COVID, of course, has played a large role in what we can and can't do right now. But I think, we have always thought it would be really great to meet other young families in our parish and for us to be able to learn from them and walk with them on this journey. Secondly, I think it's important to pray for families and pray for them and pray with them. One of my I guess I should say frustrations, or one of the things that has always bothered me a little bit, is every week at my parish when we have the petitions, we pray for vocations to the priesthood and religious life, which are worthy prayers, and we need young men and young women to be courageous and make that decision to lay their lives down for the church. That is 100% true, and we should pray for that every day. But I never, at my parish, and every parish is different, at my parish I don't hear prayers for strong and holy marriages. I don't hear prayers for married couples. We celebrate anniversaries, 50th, 75th, big anniversaries. But for a young married couple who's maybe been married for 5 years, that's an important celebration too. And I think that strong holy marriages will produce vocations to the priesthood and religious life. Look at Saints Louis and Zélie Martin. Both, of course, wanted to be religious in religious orders or priests. Neither of them were accepted at that time. They got married. They had, I believe, 9 children. 5 of those children made the decision to lay down their lives for the church. And one was, of course, a great saint, Saint Therese. So strong marriages breed vocations. And as a church, we should pray for strong marriages, and we should support the married couples in our parish by celebrating their anniversaries, by helping them to continue to grow, and by letting them know that they are an important part of the church and of the parish community. And I just think that's very, very important. And I think something practical that might be small that could make a big difference for young married couples who are really striving to live this journey. Third, provide them with support and resources to be the domestic church. I think about Luke 11 a lot with this, where they ask Jesus, they say, Lord, teach us how to pray. And for young people who are well-formed, who maybe have gone to Catholic college, maybe they're more comfortable with that. But there might be families in your parish that got married in the church, and because mom and dad really wanted them to, or grandma and grandpa really wanted them to, and they still go to mass, but it's more they're there, just kind of doing that. And at home, they don't know how to pray. They're not comfortable with that. And so find resources, materials, things you can send home with them that can help them be the domestic church. A great example that I have is on the Feast of the Epiphany at my parish. One of the things that they did was they sent us home with chalk and with a little prayer card that explained the chalking of the doors on the Feast of the Epiphany. And it was, hey, take this home, and in your home on the Feast of the Epiphany with your family, do this. And my wife and I took that home and we did it, and it was awesome. And we just commented, this would be great if there were other opportunities or other things like this. And I know that you can't do something like that every week. I get it, but having those items or having those opportunities where you can send a resource or send something home with the family that helps them be the domestic church is really powerful. And I think something that we've appreciated when our parish has done that. So I just think that's really, really important. Lastly, number 4 is really go or find people to go. It doesn't have to be you, where young families are. And that even includes online. My wife and I are notorious. We get the bulletin after Mass, go out to the car, all of a sudden Lena's crying, we got to get in her car seat. The bulletin gets put down in the car somewhere. We don't live far from church. We get home, and all of a sudden, what happens to the bulletin? It sits in the car, and we don't read through it. So finding ways to reach young families. A lot of these young families, we're in our 30s now, my wife and I. a lot of young families might even be younger than us, right? There's couples that we know that are getting married that are in their 20s and may even be more comfortable with technology. And so I think it's important to find ways to use technology to engage couples in your parish. And whether that's, sending them an email on their anniversary, or whether that's, sending an emailed, copy of the bulletin, or whether that's, sending out upcoming events. I mean, finding ways to reach them, having activities for young families or young couples that might be at a bar or a restaurant or something, where young people might like to get together and have a drink together and talk. Finding opportunities to engage them in the areas where they might be found, I think, is so important to accompaniment, and not treating young families like, a high school youth group, or like even, young adult ministry. I mean, it is, but if you're specifically targeting young families, then, target them in the places that you think they would be, versus just young single adults versus, high school students, right? So I think that is really important to sort of, as you're looking at how you engage families, what does that targeted or segmented audience look like, and how do I engage them further? And so those are just like 4 practical tips that I have that I think are helpful to engaging young families in the life of the church. And so in conclusion, raising kids is hard. Anyone out there whose parent is a parent knows the sleep deprivation, the blowouts, the frustration, the kids getting sick. I mean, there's, it's hard. It's hard work, and it's hard to sometimes know if you're doing it right, and it's, you want to pass the faith on to your kids. You want to be in the nuptial blessing. I think about there's a line, depending on which one you use, but it says, may they prove to be virtuous parents, who live to see their children's children. And I think that we all want to be virtuous parents, but sometimes, we mess up, screw up, we fail, we're not perfect. And so having a community of other young people of the parish helping us walk this road would be really helpful. And I think that it would beget more vocations. And I think that it would ultimately lead to the church, being stronger. And I think that in conclusion, COVID-19 has changed a lot for a lot of people. And I have recently been reading a book called He Leadeth Me by Father Walter Chiswick, who was a Jesuit priest who was imprisoned in war camps in Russia, and for 23 years, I believe. And he talks about very early on that it's very easy to not see God when you just go about your day-to-day existence and it's not interrupted and there's no problems and everything's good, right? But oftentimes God has to sort of break through that, right? And remind us that we are relying on him and that we need him and we need to seek him in all circumstances. And I think that as this pandemic abates, which hopefully, God willing, it will, I think that there's going to be an opportunity for the church to engage people who might be in search of something, who might have lost parents in this, who might have lost friends, who might have lost their job. And they may be looking for something, right? They may be looking for something that is not of this world. They might have a hunger or a thirst. And I think in all aspects, the church should be ready to engage those people when our churches are able to fully open back up, when we're able to gather in person, when we're able to go to restaurants again, when we're able to have big group gatherings. The church is going to have an opportunity, I believe, and I pray that we will all work together to take advantage of that, and that includes myself. I have these ideas, and as I've reflected on this, writing this talk, I've never brought those to my parish before. Maybe I should, right? And so I think it takes all of us to find ways that we can continue to serve one another and ultimately, grow this great institution that is the Catholic Church. So I want to say thank you so much for your time today, for listening to me. I hope that you got something out of this, and I do hope that maybe you have something practical you can take back to your parish or diocese to help accompany the young families that you might serve. So thank you so much, and God bless.